My name is Krista Sanford, and along with Hadley Ochiltree, are the graduate student coordinators for the speaker series in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Environmental Planning. Thank you for attending. We're happy that you're all here. The mission of the speaker series is to engage with leaders in the allied design professions. We are proud of our students, faculty, and faculties and wish to demonstrate our hospitality to our guest speakers for whom we are grateful. These talks are recorded for posterity for use in studios and the greater community. We ask you to be engaged during the talks, to listen, to quietly take notes, avoid digital distraction, and stay for the entire 1 hour duration. A short Q&A will follow the talk, after which you can scan the QR code for attendance, and then we will meet in the Commons studio for a follow-up reception with some refreshments. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Sara Zewde. Ms. Zewde is the founding principal of Studio Zewde, a Harlem-based design practice celebrated for its fusion of landscape architecture, urbanism, and art. Trained at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, she has quickly become a leading voice in contemporary landscape architecture. Her work is deeply rooted in storytelling, memory, and identity, exploring how design can honor cultural histories while shaping spaces for vibrant community life. Sara Zewde's project spanned public parks, waterfronts, and cultural landscapes across the country, receiving widespread recognition for their sensitivity to history and their bold, expressive aesthetics. In parallel with her practice, Sara serves as assistant professor in landscape architecture at Harvard Graduate School of Design, where she challenges students to think critically about race, culture, and the lived experience in design. She has been honored by the Architectural League of New York's Emerging Voices Award, the American Society of Landscape Architects, and numerous publications that recognize her as a powerful force shaping the future of the profession. We welcome her today as our speaker for the Women in Landscape Architecture lecture, which works in partnership with the American Society of Landscape Architects to support and foster mentorship and leadership opportunities, as well as to create space for dialogue around gender equitable representation in the profession. Sara's ideals, practice, and scholarship embody these values, bringing forward narratives and perspectives often left out of mainstream design conversations, making her an especially fitting voice for this year's ASLA WELA lecture. Please join me in welcoming Sara Zewde.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. The title of my talk today is The Aesthetics of Being. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means, but I'll start by sharing how I came to this profession. I grew up on the Gulf Coast of the United States, back and forth between Texas and Louisiana. And I was in college when I watched this storm brew and barrel towards the Gulf Coast. This is Hurricane Katrina. And in its aftermath, let me make sure I know the time.
I'm not sure your microphone's on. Let me just make sure.
I think you're right. I didn't turn it on.
Okay. It's a little hard to tell in the front because.
Test.
Okay, there.
Should I start from the beginning? All right. So I'm from the Gulf Coast of the United States. I grew up in Texas and Louisiana, and I went to college. Didn't know what I wanted to major in, but I watched this storm event move towards the Gulf Coast where I grew up. And you may not remember this, maybe you weren't born, actually. But this Hurricane Katrina was more than just a storm. There was a very complex aftermath. We're actually almost to the day 20 years from Hurricane Katrina. It happened August 29, 2005. And I was talking to actually some grad students in their studio about their project in New Orleans, and we were talking about, what keeps New Orleans a city that's not underwater is basically a series of both earthen levees as well as concrete walls. And all that system failed on August 29th, 2005, and almost 3,000 people died, and it was a huge complex problem, from a logistical problem to an infrastructure problem to an ecology problem to a political problem to a cultural problem. All of these systems tied into each other. And I was watching all of this from my dorm room in college, and I was searching for a discipline that would allow me to understand all those different factors and understand them in a way that I could maybe think about ways to intervene in them. And long story short, that's how I ended up in landscape architecture. Felt like a discipline, maybe despite itself sometimes, that could, with its skill set, engage in these ideas. Along the way, I've come to form a practice. I said despite itself, because the landscape architecture that I was reading about before I started studying it didn't necessarily reflect the kinds of priorities that I have, coming away from Hurricane Katrina. And so I started to try to find influences that could help me expand the way that I was thinking about what landscape architecture could be and do. So I'll start by sharing a few of those, and one of those inspires the title of the talk, Aesthetics of Being. But Toni Morrison writes a lot about memory and identity. And in fact, she actually describes flooding as a form of the earth remembering. So she talks about there's an essay that she wrote called Sites of Memory. And she says, we shouldn't call it flooding, we should call it remembering, because the water always returns to where it once was. And Sharifa Rhodes Pitts is another writer. She wrote a book called Harlem is Nowhere. Actually, after I read this book, I moved my company to New York and Harlem specifically. She talks about Harlem both as a real place and as an idea. And I have found that to be useful in my work with communities all over the country and the world. People live in real places, but places mean things to people. When you are working on a project in a particular community, you get a sense that this place means more than, a kind of plot of land. And so part of the practice of landscape architecture for me, having the privilege of shaping the places of other people's lives, is understanding the meaning of those places. That what is the idea of the place? And then how can design amplify that idea to make places more resonant with the people who live there? And then finally, an aesthetic of being. I don't know about y'all, but I didn't grow up with the word design used very much in my household. Would you guys agree? Was the word design used a lot in your? No, right? So to then become a designer, it was a bit of I felt like a jump a little bit philosophically for me. But I read something that the late writer Bell Hooks wrote, where she talks about an aesthetic of being, and she says, in my home, the word design was never used, but there are these traditions, these rituals, and these patterns that people live in and continue on. And maybe if we understand those as forms of design, then we can come up with a practice of landscape architecture that's more expansive and more resonant with the wide range of the way people live their lives. And that was really powerful for me, and it gave me an entry point to understand that the places that I grew up in and the people that I know are also relevant to this field. So with this, with Hurricane Katrina is kind of my launch into a journey towards landscape architecture, and with those big questions floating around in my mind, I currently, I'm a practitioner. I have a practice named Studio Zewde in Harlem, but I'm also a professor, and I'm doing all these things, but for me, they don't feel like different. People are like, oh, you have so many jobs. And I'm like, that's not how I think about it. They really are different activities that compound each other. There's a feedback loop between these, between asking questions and figuring out what there is to learn about those potential answers in any particular place, in any particular project. If you find yourself in Harlem, ever come by the studio. We have a really diverse set of folks in the office, and when I say diverse, I mean they come from very different professional backgrounds. And that's really important to me too, that landscape architecture isn't this closed off space. But when I think about it, people have been living in the land in the Americas, they've been living for tens of thousands of years. And the practice of living in the land was something that everybody was engaged in. And so landscape architecture is too small a profession for us to say, we know it all. That we can bring all these different ways of knowing about the land and designing for it and facing all of the challenges that the land is facing. And so, we have folks that have art history backgrounds, sociology backgrounds, statistics. We have architecture, we have soil science, we have a textile designer, someone that came directly from the construction industry, we have an architect. And a lot of people also dually have landscape architecture backgrounds, but that kind of breadth is really important to me. So we are bringing all these different ways of knowing into the work of making, making landscapes for people. Some of the faces in our office. So all of the work that I'll show you have very meaningful contributions from everybody on the screen. And for us, it's not just about those big ideas, but it's really about the craft of construction. We don't have a details library in our office. Literally everything that we design and build is meant to be questioned. When we start to think about the big narratives of a place, the aesthetics of being of a place, we should be generating really unique places to reflect the physical and cultural context and ecological context of every place. And so being a part of the detailing, the design, the construction is a big, big part of our commitment to this work. Because ultimately it is what gets built that makes a place feel like it belongs in its context and the people feel like they belong in that landscape. So I've selected 4 projects that range in scale. We're going to go from big to small, just because I needed a way to order them. That's how I thought about it. I wanted to show a range of projects because one thing that's important to me is to share with you is that these ideas, in particular the aesthetic of being, is something that can be used, or that we definitely use in a really wide range of project types. And that's something in our office that I really strive for, and if we're really honest about the ideas and really try to tap into a particular place, none of our projects should look alike. So I don't want anybody to be able to say that's a Studio Zewde project because it should feel like it was always there and we were kind of never there. And beyond that, the idea that with a really wide range of project types and scales that we're really challenging ourselves to be the best designers because they bring out very different aspects of your thinking and your work. So we're going to go from big to small. This one actually was inspired. I put this one in specifically because I'm here in Utah and you'll see what the connection is in a moment. Anyone heard of Dia Beacon? One person. Everybody clap. This is a museum in about an hour north of New York City. The Art Foundation is an arts institution that has sites all over the United States and one in Utah. Anybody want to guess what site? We're actually not far from it. Anybody want to guess? Okay, well, I'll tell you. The answer's coming. But this is an institution that was founded as a kind of counter institution. It didn't want to be a kind of typical museum. This is in the 1960s, late 1960s, early 70s, with the rise of the environmental movement. And so they wanted to, at the time, okay, as soon as you have a guess, just say it out loud. You can interrupt me and just yell it out loud. What they wanted to do was support an emerging movement called the land art movement that really went hand in. Did I hear it? Yeah. So they were really formed to help support this emerging movement of land art. And so it became not a museum about, holding works in a building, but it became about a series of sites around the country. And so we were commissioned basically to think about one of their collection of sites. Have you all gone? I meant to. I wanted to go, yeah. Nobody come? Okay. So this is a site of theirs in Beacon, New York, along the Hudson River. And we were commissioned to design these 8 acres south of the building. So Robert Irwin, who's a land artist, was commissioned when they originally bought this building in the early 1990s. And he designed these really iconic gardens, which is, for the most part, what people know. This is, as I mentioned, very iconic landscape. But nobody really had been, even the staff, really familiar with the rest of the property that the site, that the Dia Arts Foundation owns. What happened was in 2012, the site flooded. You can kind of see it kind of sits in a bowl. There's this raised berm here, which is the railroad, and this kind of cliff here. And so the building sits literally in a big bowl. And so what happened during Hurricane Sandy is it revealed the degree to which they're very vulnerable to flooding, because it's all sitting right here. And their collection of art, their incredible collection of art inside this building, was on the brink of basically major disaster. They saw some flooding in the basement. So the commission was, I mean, originally when they talked about the project, they said, we need a path. And I was like, I don't want to do a path project. But then there's this art, as I mentioned, there's an art historian in our office, and she was like, look, Dia is an incredible institution. You want to do anything you can with them. And so we took on the project, and when we learned about the flooding issue, we realized this is actually a much bigger project than a path. This project has to deal with the water. And so we convinced them of the fact that, I think in their minds they thought an engineer does that and a landscape architect does the paths. And what we really convinced them of was that landscape architecture is probably the best suited profession to deal with that, and deal with it in a unique way. That we would come up with in our own process something that an engineer couldn't, or wouldn't, I should say, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. But our work started, researching the history of the site. One of the things that we learned was this is the Allen site. It used to be part of the historic floodplain of the river. And so the construction of the railroad kind of cut off the site from, again, what the river wanted to do, thinking about Toni Morrison and the remembering. The site's seen many chapters of history, many chapters of Native history. There's a history of slavery in this region. There's also many chapters of industry, including the site being a brickyard. After the chapter of it being a brickyard, it became a Nabisco print making facility for the boxes, and that's the building today. So this is what the site was when we were hired. A huge flat lawn. A lot of maintenance required. We also, part of our research, we talked to Lenape and Wappinger people from the area, and they were telling us about the fact that the site actually used to be a portage site where people would cross the Hudson River, and that this was a really important part of the tradition of the region. And when the waters were low and you could cross, this is when you would access peoples and regions that for the rest of the year that you weren't. There was an important technology transfer and trade that happened, and this site was the launch point for that. Robert Irwin, when he designed those iconic gardens to the north, really thought about the landscape as a grid. He organized everything around this grid, even the gallery spaces inside the museum. So all of the planting, everything was about the grid. He was really intrigued with north is to the left. The railroad is here. And so he was really intrigued by the railroad and the geometry of a grid. He thought the grid was this kind of egalitarian way of organizing space, and so he wanted to organize the landscape and galleries like that. That stopped at the southern edge of the building where that flat lawn starts. But when we learned about this history of the portage, and that actually this was an important site for east-west movement across the river, we found that kind of distinction really interesting, that Irwin had this industrial grid, but the native people who were really tied to the fluctuation of the river saw it more of a place of movement from north to south, from east to west rather. So that led us to this concept of how to connect the site visually, culturally, ecologically to the river again. And so this is an early concept sketch that kind of got us in the direction of the project. In Irwin's grid is emanating this way. We wanted to take that and bend that towards the river and really amplify the history of that connection to the river, and also to express and hold the water. Not making it something to be afraid of, but really giving it a place and making it a part of the experience of the landscape. It wants to be here, it used to be here, it will be here, and it will be more of it as we move forward in time. So let's design for that now. And let the land remember, and also make that a part of the experience of coming to this museum. This is very inspired by the works of the land artists who are using their works to kind of index change of landscape over time. And in this way, this becomes a register of the changing volumes of precipitation over the course of a season, a year, over our lifetimes, and beyond. It comes back to that Toni Morrison idea. This is the direct quote. That floods is the word they use, but it is not flooding, it is remembering. All water has perfect memory. So we use clay models to explore the kinds of sculptural expressions that these landforms could take. And we translated those landforms, as I mentioned. It's really important for us to be rigorous about both exploration, but then the translation of that into something that can be built and expressive of our ideas. We worked with Sherwin design engineers, who were our civil engineers, to calibrate the forms of these, the volumes of these landforms to to calibrate the volumes of these landforms to flooding projections. So this is the current condition. You can see here that bowl effect and the degree to which this building is very vulnerable. So this is, kind of us testing out what happens with these various landforms and basins that we've created in a way that those forms are very legible, but also protecting the building. We really wanted the site to be reflective of itself. And there was a point in the project where we actually went out and found all of the chapters of history that we had learned about in the ground. So things like the brick, very visible in the site. And so we really also wanted to use materials that all came from the site. And we'll talk a little bit about that. This is a sketch that a woman named Alison Duke did when we went out and documented all the materials on the site. And so we said any material that we use is going to come from here. This collection of the things that we've been finding. All that lawn, we thought it was an important opportunity to think about a more robust ecosystem. So we worked with Larry Wiener Associates, who are meadow specialists, on converting that lawn into over 90 species of meadow plants. We organized it in a series of patches of different palettes, really responsive to the range of levels of moisture in the various undulating topographies. And really starting to think about the changing expression of the landscape across the seasons. Again, this was also, we were really pushing this direction by thinking about this legacy of land art. And its ability to change and be expressive of change is what makes people want to come back. And we wanted that to be, the museum really wanted that to be an offering to visitors, to come back and see this place in a different way all the time. So you can see how, that flat lawn now is these series of undulating forms that really invite you to move through the landscape. We kept a tiny patch of lawn, knowing that the museum is really interested in bringing some of their programs outdoors. So this small lawn is kind of hugged by the range of different meadows. So here we're moving kind of towards the first berm. It connects now to the elevation of that railroad berm. It gives you a view then out to the river. You can see that little patch of lawn being hugged there. And this is looking towards the railroad berm here, and you can see that small bit of lawn. You can see how the micro-topography also functions as swales. So they've already done a lot of the rough grading, and I can't remember if I included that picture here, but these are already holding water. These are small kind of dips in the land, in the topography. So this is really, a stormwater management project. This is on the top of one of the berms, and we were really interested in the idea of the top of these landforms being kind of promenades and social spaces that give you prospect back to the museum, but also towards the lower basins that are holding water. And then moving down into the lower basin, those meadows become the wet meadows become these really exuberant kind of expressions of vegetation, and a totally different thing than the higher, drier meadows. And so looking out from the museum, you can kind of see the layers of stormwater management that are embedded in this landscape. This could be appreciated from just the kind of sculptural dimension, the cultural narrative, but also, again, and this is what I think landscape architecture does best, is the ability to kind of synthesize all of that thinking. But so we have this kind of 10-year stormwater detention capacity below the lawn just to optimize its usability. But the layers of protection here really come from a series of berms that reduce the amount of water adjacent to the building that's draining in that watershed. So this is again from one of the wet basins, and you can see how those forms emerge as the water rises. So this is the before. We are in construction right now, so I popped in some of the construction shots from one of the gallery spaces. This is moving through the rough grading. This is probably January or so. You can see them pouring the concrete. This is a loading deck for all the art. You can see the forms starting to kind of come through. Here's the concrete done. Now you can see that first berm tying into the railroad berm here. Some of the trees going in. This must have been March or so. This is a rendering about, this is what it will look like. And from a maintenance standpoint, that flat 4 or 5 acres of lawn was really a significant cost to the museum. And now, we've been working with them on transitioning into this other relationship to the land through meadow management. And it'll be a significant savings, actually, to shift into this mode of management. This gives you a sense of the kind of seasonal change that the meadows will inspire. So this will open in the spring of next year. So you guys should see it. All right, Graffiti Pier. Anyone been to Philadelphia? Okay. Anyone been to Graffiti Pier? You get an award.
I live in Philly.
Oh, okay. So you've been. Okay. So Graffiti Pier. So graffiti was invented in Philadelphia, and they love to tell us New Yorkers this. But basically, when coal declined in the 1970s in the state of Pennsylvania, it left a lot of infrastructure underused. And so those places, the infrastructure of coal really became a place for graffiti to flourish. Including Pier 18 and Pier 20 on the Delaware River. That's this pier and this pier. Pier 20 is kind of falling into the river, you can kind of see. But really since the 1970s, this has been a really important place for graffiti writers to come and cultivate their practice. And so this stayed in the realm of the underground street world until 2010, when something happened. Anybody want to guess what happened in 2010? It changed our lives. Instagram, anybody on Instagram? Okay, so Instagram made it this really popular place. It became actually the most Instagrammed place in Philadelphia. And it became a huge liability for Conrail that owned the site because hundreds of people were coming a day. And so that's when we were commissioned to design something. They wanted to, as I mentioned, it's a liability, so part of it was about safety and accessibility, but also trying to think about how to leverage this incredibly beautiful place that's been made by people continuously being remade. It's a different place every day. People coming out here and tagging. It's an incredible outdoor street art museum. So when the graffiti writers found out that landscape architects were going to get involved, they were like so annoyed. Graffiti is about transgression and breaking the rules. Now they're going to make it a park. That doesn't really go with the idea of graffiti. And moreover, graffiti writers have and are criminalized for the beauty that they've imbued here. They have day jobs and government names, and there's a lot to be mindful of when thinking about graffiti. So we told the client, we said, we want to be respectful, and so we said our public engagement for this project, we don't want it to be public. That we would have a series of one-on-one conversations with graffiti writers, in whatever way that they're comfortable having them, to talk about this project. So we got a bar tab from the client, and we met at bars. We didn't take any pictures of them. We had, in some cases, they weren't even comfortable with that. They sent representatives to us. We got anonymous emails and phone calls. Sometimes we still do. We've been working on this since 2019. But it was important for them to hear from us. Their main question was, why do anything here? And we had to share with them that if you do nothing, in 25 years, the site will be inundated by high tides. Now we're not even talking about a storm event. This is actually a chance, if you get involved and shape this project in the way that you want, this is a chance to save graffiti here. So we tried to shift the way we were framing it and say, this is a save graffiti pier project. And that really mobilized them to get involved. Across these disparate conversations, we asked everybody the same question. What is the best thing that could happen here, and what is the worst thing that can happen here? Like, if something has to happen, how good can it get and how bad can it get? And we mapped all the responses that we got on this chart, and basically you could understand them in a range from untouched to new park. Basically, the best thing that could happen is don't touch it, and the worst thing that can happen is it looks like a park, which is hard for a landscape architect to hear. And we had to think about what does that mean for how we work here. But even when we mapped it, we said, okay, there are some emerging themes, and maybe we can use that as our kind of guidelines for working. So we came back to them after all those conversations, and we said, this is what we think we've heard from across the conversation. Ensuring the continuation and expansion of art, keeping the site vegetated and passive, making it safe and accessible without looking safe and accessible, and keeping it gritty, right? Yeah, go figure, what does that mean? But so we worked through these, and we're able to then come back to them again and say, here are the ways in which those conversations are really shaping the site design. So for instance, keeping it gritty. I asked one of the graffiti writers, what does gritty mean? And he said, oh, it's like rocks and mud and water and plants. As he was describing it, it occurred to me that the ecosystem of graffiti really intersects with the ecosystem of this historic marsh. And so we proposed removing the bulkheads and reintroducing an intertidal zone here, which is nowhere in Philadelphia on the Delaware River, which is an estuary. And so this is, the client was supportive of this ambition. It does a couple of things. It can create this kind of buffer zone. So one of the things our friend from Philly can tell you is that there's intense development pressure. And so, while there's pressure from the sea in terms of sea level rise, there's also pressure from the land in terms of condo rise. So this buffer is also a buffer from a lot of the new condo development around the site, but also allows for, as the tides continue to rise, a way for the park to kind of slowly shift upland as well. So this is where we landed after the end of the concept design phase. During the concept design phase, we took some early renderings back to the graffiti writers, and we had them actually tag onto the renderings their feedback. So we had to decode these tags and figure out. It was a cool idea at first, and I was like, wait, what do we do with this? But we were able to kind of take some of the cues and work that into some of the details. So I'll show you a little bit more about it. But that means, I mean, for one thing, creating this, again, because everything is kind of densifying around it, this idea of feeling a sense of refuge through a green frame started to emerge as a really important dimension of the project. We also designed custom site furnishings in the language of the Jersey barriers that are all over the site. And in so doing, these kind of large, expansive surfaces also make for great places for more art. During the community engagement, we had a global pandemic. It was crazy. We had to be there. And we lost the ability to meet with them in person at the bars and random places again. So, but they were making zines. So we decided to make a zine with them called The Voices of Graffiti Pier. And that would be the way that we would communicate with them. So they would actually go to the site, tag it, send us photos, and we made a zine out of it and integrated into the pages of it. We also included our design updates. And there was a pre-stamped postcard in the zine so they could write us back. There's no mailing list of graffiti writers that exists, so what we had to do was we had a series, we had probably about 10 or 12 graffiti writers who we got really close with, and we just gave them stacks of the zine, and then they distributed among their networks. So I'll show you a few, the renderings of the current design. One of the things with the whole, making it safe and accessible without looking safe and accessible, we went digging through the archives and found a 1923 drawing of this railing, which is not to code in the contemporary sense, but it's beautiful. And we thought that might be one way into thinking about how to make it safe and accessible. So this is the existing conditions. You can see this is not very safe. But that using a similar kind of language for the railings and giving it this kind of fencing that we can keep the language as something that was always there, but upgraded. So this is the before, and this is after. What you see here is a kind of reinterpretation of what was here into a bioswale. This is upgraded surfacing. We're thinking stabilized soil. To make this ADA accessible, but still keeping it gritty. And there's some selective removal of the existing species, but really the goal here is to keep the character as much as possible what it is. A lot of these structures, the abutment walls and so forth, have major cracks. So a lot of this is shoring up the structural condition to make this safe and accessible, but these elements of stormwater management are important to kind of detail and think about in a way that also kind of keep it the way feeling in similar spirit. This is before and this is after. So we're introducing these planting areas that have a more robust palette of plants, but kind of feel in character with what was there. This is before and this is after. We've kind of taken the shady pocket of underneath the trestle and turned it into a kind of shade garden. So this is before and this is after. What you're seeing here is some of the remnant coal. In the original version of this rendering, we cleaned up the coal and the graffiti writers were like, no, a big part of going to graffiti pier is coming home with coal on your clothes. And we looked at the client's time and was like, all right, I guess we gotta keep it. But so what you're seeing here is an addition of shade trees, our site furnishings, and again, kind of introducing some plant areas that, make it feel vegetated in the way that it once was, but with a more resilient palette. This is on top of the trestle. There's chunks of concrete, like pieces of the pier falling into the river. And people were risking it all to climb up and see this view of the skyline. So when we were thinking about the top of this, they were like, whatever you do, don't make this the High Line. And we're like, okay. So the idea really became, we wanted to make this accessible. As I mentioned, they're just climbing up the side of the structure. So we introduced a ramp kind of cutting into the bed of the trestle. And really the planting is grasses and sedums, some gravel paths, some stabilized soil paths, including seeding that, again, offers more surfaces for art. On Pier 20, which I mentioned is falling into the river, we worked with Sherwood design engineers again to think about actually a wall that is taller than the existing pier structure that artists can also use to be in dialogue with the rising tides. So you can get a sense of that here. That as the tides rise, actually the site will shift, the edge of the site will shift, but artists can continue to be in dialogue through this art, and then that serves as a kind of index of that change. Okay, how are we doing on time? Echoes of the Hill. Anyone heard of Columbus, Indiana? This guy. Okay, a few people. It's a really incredible architectural legacy. This man named J. Irwin Miller was the CEO of Cummins, which is a diesel engineering company, headquartered in southern Indiana. It's a town of 30,000 people. How many people live in Logan? About that. Okay, 15. All right, 50. Oh, okay. So this place is half the size of Logan. But he had this idea that, he really believed in the idea that architecture could elevate civic engagement. And he asked himself the question whether Columbus, Indiana could be the best place to live in America. What would it take to get there? So he committed a lot of his own funds and also Cummins to this establish an architecture foundation that would pay for the commissioning of architects from all over the world to make incredible public architecture. So I'm talking about the fire station, the library, the schools, the kind of pieces of everyday life are all designed by these incredible architects. And the city serves as, this incredible kind of museum of modernist architecture. And all of the people there are very engaged in the civic realm. They're very literate about design. And his ambition about how an elevated language of design in the public realm could really bring people together and inspire pride and engagement in town life. So just snapping through a few of the architectural icons around town. This includes Millrace Park, which was a park designed by Michael von Valkenburg Associates in 1993, opened in 1993. And this is a seminal project. Have y'all studied this project at all? It's one of the projects that I had to study when I was in school, maybe because he was my professor. But it was, kind of pitched to us in landscape architecture history as an important project in terms of designing public parks that also serve a stormwater function, designed to flood, really. And so my office was commissioned in 2023 to design something here that would be in dialogue with this legacy of design. And so I talked to Michael about it, and he told me this interesting story about this piece of the project, this landform, this half-moon landform. And he was saying that this was a nod to the mound building tradition of the region. We had some community engagement with folks in Columbus, and we asked them 3 questions about the past of the park, the present, and the future. I was mindful of the fact that this was the 30-year anniversary of the park, so I was really interested in hearing from folks in Columbus about their relationship to the park and where they think the park should be going into the future. So we have this map, and we asked people to pin their favorite spot in the park. And what you can see is actually the hill became really full of these pins, and this huge lawn that's next to it didn't have a single one. And I thought that was interesting, the kind of adjacency of that. So I wanted to look a little bit more into understanding the mound building traditions that are specific to here, the Ohio Hopewell. These mound building traditions, the Ohio Hopewell specifically, are really about creating a landscape that is a place of civic pride, not so different from J. Irwin Miller's own ambition for the town. These are places less associated with burial and more associated with gathering, with ceremony, with discourse. They were the public space. So we were interested in taking that half moon and designing something that would complete it, not to wall it off per se, but to think about a way to extend the language of creating a circular space, but could still function as a part of the larger park. And we started to think about ideas of a framing language that would, again, mark that space, but also allow it to be an open space. So these are some early study models looking at, that's the existing landform, and how maybe some kind of framed echo of that form could help do that. Columbus has an official town color, and they're very, very into it, and it's red. It's a specific Pantone, it has to be the specific Pantone. So we just, from early studies, we always thought about this thing in red, which is, yeah, that's why you see this. And a big part of our process too, even from early conception of projects, is to mock it up one-to-one. So I would encourage you, even in school, to any chance you get, mock up things, not indoors because the dimensions of things feel very different when you're indoors versus outdoors, but get used to that, go outside all the time and like just map out things. This is a sketch, you know, and this is how I like to sketch, is this. So, I mean, after doing this, we changed the form and the dimensions and the size a bunch of times. Same thing with the Geobeacon project. We mocked those up. I can't even tell you how many times. And every time we did it, it was always leading to adjustments. It was never just to see what we drew. It was always a form of study. Originally, when we thought about this project, I was really interested in the idea of this being built out of metal. I was kind of obsessed with the precision of the form, but we didn't have the budget. So we had to get creative, and it ended up being my favorite part of the project. It ended up that we used bamboo. We got to know the bamboo growers, and we actually engaged the community members in helping us install the project, which was really cool because I don't know if you've ever cut bamboo, but really obviously each one of these is different. Each piece is different, which is different than perhaps a material that's mass produced. So there's really kind of a conversation to have every time you cut a piece of bamboo about where to cut, how to cut. And it became a really dynamic part of the project. It's not a perfect form, but that's actually my favorite thing about it, that it's imperfections, and you'll see what I mean. But here's the bamboo growers who were from Georgia and South Carolina actually drove out here and also wanted to be involved in the construction. Here's us painting the famous Columbus town red, and finally installing it. So you can see how it does help frame a kind of center space, but really extends the presence of the hill into the lawn and still creating, allowing us to be a big open space. Columbus is a sister city with Japan. I didn't know that, but it was a great coincidence because this kind of language of bamboo construction and red actually tie into that legacy. This gives you a sense of the scale. This is about 100 people gathering underneath it. This is the weekend that we finished, people coming out to see what the hell we made. But you can see like the kind of dynamic language of the geometry relative to the hill, how they're in language with one another. Yeah, he didn't include a snow picture, but it looks pretty cool when it's snowing and the red's kind of popping out. They started to host concerts, and the zone within the red is the VIP area, which is kind of cool. We worked with the Parks Department pretty closely on the spacing between the bamboo posts for maintenance. And we worked with the different large events, the festivals, the parades, the marathon, to design this so that it doesn't actually impede any of their programming, but actually supports it. Part of that was visibility through, so that you could see this as a place for viewing from. But it kind of forms this really festive backdrop during those large events. but at the same time, functions in the everyday space as well. So this is movie night. I mean, you can see how this structure really kind of hugs people and makes a sense of place out of that large lawn where nobody put their pins, Okay, last one. This is the smallest one, and that range of scales, as I mentioned, is really to communicate the idea that these big ideas don't have to be big projects. They could be tiny projects too. It could be a little bamboo structure. It could be a little backyard. This is a tiny, tiny backyard. And you'll see some of the same questions and processes that we use at the big scale to think about the backyard of a couple. This is the before. Very inspiring, right? This couple is from Lebanon and Turkey, and they have a love of textiles from the Eastern Mediterranean. It's something that brings their two cultures together, and that's all we kind of knew in terms of inspo. But part of this is to say, as I mentioned in the beginning, designing places that feel resonant for people, that they can be ecologically functional, but also culturally resonant, and that there is agency that we have as landscape architects to shape that. And it doesn't always have to look the same. It can look, there's room for us to explore what that looks like, an ecologically and culturally responsible place. So we started to look at the textile traditions of the two, of Lebanon and Turkey, and started to also think about, I guess I should show you one thing about this small space, is there's actually a lot of grade change, and there's these stairs. So with such a tiny backyard, we didn't want to use any square inch of space for circulation. And you can see most of it is that. There's these stairs, there's another set of stairs here, and there's a path, and then all you get is like the leftover space. So how can you maximize this to just be places for hanging and maybe some planting and reduce the amount of circulation? So we started to think about rugs as an organizing framework for how to do that, both as a way to navigate that grade change, but also to think about the rugs as places to be, but also spaces to circulate. And by combining the two, we really optimize the square footage here. So these are just some sketches about what could that mean, how could that translate to the small space. So here's the before, here's the after. So you can see that we removed that set of stairs, and now you kind of have, the rugs are stairs, effectively. And they function as places to sit. It was important to them that they had both green space for their young kid, but also place, more hardscape place where they could sit outside. We learned about this tradition called bark, which is basically they take silver or other metals and integrate them into the embroidery. I thought that was really beautiful. So we actually embedded metal into the edges of those rugs, which you can see here in a similar pattern. And when this lighting is on, that really kind of sparkles. And so, the idea here is that, again, I mentioned that we don't have any construction details, that there should be a kind of challenge to ourselves as landscape architects to think about, well, we have we have trees, we have, paving, we have lighting, but what we do with them is actually wide open. That it can really look like whatever it wants to, and that doesn't mean we're not being responsible, that we have agency in shaping those landscapes to deal with all of those challenges, ecological and cultural. That's it.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Looks like we have time for a couple questions. Does anybody have a question?
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I have a question about the size for the tagging, and when you did the furniture, you had already integrated some tagging. Did you consult with the artists? Was there design that they had, and then so that was the
A
question.
lot of consulting with the graffiti writers. There is a very complex world of rules in graffiti. So, for instance, if you are more respected in graffiti, you can tag on top of somebody that is not as respected, for instance. And we had the ability to kind of change some areas. None of it's precious in the sense that they're always tagging on top of each other, so there's no preservation. So there is actually an opening there culturally for us to also get involved as a layer. But there are rules of the road. And so they continue to be, we're still working on them, very involved in telling us how to operate. But the graffiti also poses a problem for the structures themselves. So there is going to be some change as we move through the phases of the project. I didn't put pictures of this, we built a big physical model, and after we did a structural assessment, and we put on the model all of the major breaks, and they tagged the model to tell us, okay, phasing ideas, which areas, which walls are associated with the most respected people, this is where the photographers are, this is where there's this whole kind of other mental mapping, and so yes, the answer is they're very much involved, and there's a very curatorial dimension to the graffiti world that, yeah, they're basically the curators of the project.
What school did you take?
Oh, my resume, okay. It's on the internet. I did undergrad at Boston University, and I did sociology and statistics there. That was when Katrina happened, and I realized I wanted to be an architect, and then I learned that we don't have architecture where I was going to college. So I went to grad school, and I realized I wanted to do a master of architecture, landscape architecture. Then I realized you have to have a really good portfolio. I hadn't drawn since I was 7 years old. So I did a master of city planning, and I worked as a city planner for a while, and I realized that actually wasn't quite getting at what I wanted to do. So I came back again, and I did a master of city planning at MIT. I came back again and did a master of landscape architecture at Harvard. Which is the long road.
Okay. Within each of your locations and projects, you kind of talked about both water management and a connection to the space. And I was curious kind of your process behind finding and creating that connection while also managing that water, because each location you had very different materials and formats, so I was just kind of wondering the process behind that.
Yeah, I know. It never looks the same way more than once. It's a kind of messy process, and it's really hard to tell a client, I'm like, I have no idea what this project is going to look like or how we're going to get there. Like I told you, the Dia Beacon project, they wanted a path. And I was like, we'll give you a path. And then as we started to research, talk to Native people, walk the site, do a historical kind of review of existing documentation, basically what I'm doing as we go through all these different modes of research is looking for patterns. When is it that things are emerging through oral narratives, through the historical documents, through what I'm seeing on the site, through all of these, when are they starting to tell the same story? That's when things align, and I always move in that direction. Okay, I see that being resonant in all these other ways, and then I just keep moving in that direction until something starts to clarify about what this project should be doing functionally, and then what should it look like and be about. That's more or less. I don't know if that brings clarity, but it's not clear. That's the problem. And it's taken me a while to be really confident about saying, I don't know. Because I think a lot of what's celebrated about design is this figure of a designer that comes in and like smells the place and is like, this should go here, this should go there, very HGTV kind of thing. And the reality is, landscape as a design, as a medium for design is a very different thing. It's very complex, and we should be confident in saying that's not, it doesn't make us less designers or less creative. It actually, I think, really honors what we do as something very different and dynamic and about systems. And yeah.
Thank you for the excellent questions. We're giving them for
Speaker today.